Good to go.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 4th Annual Education Law and Policy Conference presented by the Defense of Freedom Institute and the Federalist Society. My name is Angela Morabito, and I am DFI's Director of Media Outreach and spokesperson. Before we begin, and as y'all find your seats, just a few logistical items. To access CLE credits, please scan the QR code on the back of your programs. We will be in this room, which is Salon 1, for most of the day, and we'll have lunch and book signing next door in Salon 2. Restrooms are located down the hall and to the left, just past the registration tables. And the Wi-Fi is on tent cards on your tables, but if you don't see it, it's Ritz-Carlton Conference, and the password is education25, all lowercase. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Bob Eitel, co-founder and president of the Defense of Freedom Institute, to officially begin today's program.
Good morning, all. I'm Bob Eitel, president and co-founder of the Defense of Freedom Institute, and it's my privilege to welcome you to the 2025 Education Law and Policy Conference co-hosted by DFI and the Federalist Society. First off, I'd like to thank Dean Reuter, Nathan Kicksmerick, and the rest of the Federalist Society staff for their agreement to co-sponsor this conference and for their close and easy cooperation in putting on this event. They've been a pleasure to deal with, and I hope we've been the same. We greatly appreciate their partnership and their recognition that today's discussions will contribute to the ongoing legal and policy debates in American education and civil rights matters in our schools, colleges, and universities. Today's convening marks our 4th conference, but for all of us, today's conference hits a bit differently than our prior meetings, because we're coming together at a pivotal moment, not just in education, but for civil society as a whole. All of us are in shock at the murder of Charlie Kirk, a fearless advocate for free speech and the free exchange of ideas, especially on college campuses. We need to be very frank about why Charlie was murdered. He was killed for speaking, for engaging in political debate, for arguing a certain point of view, here a conservative point of view, with which his assassin disagreed. For many, Charlie was a walking, talking testament to civic virtue and the foundational role played by free speech, free inquiry, and open debate in a constitutional republic. His approach was to travel to college campuses and ask anyone in his audience to ask him a question that reflected an opposing point of view. He then explained why the questioner was wrong on the issue, hoping to convince his interrogator, or probably more likely the audience itself, that he or she was wrong. This is all the more remarkable considering that he did this while facing the hurricane headwinds of campus illiberalism, at a time when cancel culture has been all the rage in higher education, and when conservative activists have not been welcome on many college campuses. Yet, through his work over the years, it can be easily argued that he still changed people's minds, not through violence and abuse, but through persuasion and argument. There is another dimension of Charlie's work that is less discussed, and I'd like to highlight it here. It's not just what Charlie did, persuading through debate and argument, but how he did it. He did it with grace. He did it with grace toward his opponents. It's not to say he wasn't forceful or aggressive or earnest, and occasionally caused embarrassment to his interrogator. But at the end of the day, it was respectful disagreement. So I can think of no better way to honor Charlie's life and those like him than by engaging in the free and open debate and respectful disagreement that has long been so championed by him and groups like the Federalist Society. So today, our panelists and speakers will engage to do just that: question, discuss, disagree, debate, opine, and convince those with whom they disagree respectfully and with grace. Since these conferences started, due to the efforts of many of the people in this room and many of the people watching on the live stream, we have seen tremendous developments in education law and policy. The overturning of the Biden administration's notorious Title IX regulations and student loan cancellation rules, the pushback against gender ideology and DEI in schools, a pivotal presidential election, and the start of Secretary of Education Linda McMahon's tenure, which has taken aggressive steps to return control over K-12 to the states, to purge gender ideology and DEI from federally funded education programs, and to push back on and to push forward on groundbreaking reforms in the federal student loan program. And I gotta tell you, I think this conference has done a pretty good job of anticipating and perhaps furthering these trends and developments. At our first conference in 2022, we raised the question as to what role, if any, should there be for the U.S. Department of Education. In 2023, we explored the impact of organized labor on K-12 education and the regulatory overreach by the executive branch in schools and colleges. Last year, we asked whether we were on the verge of a new civil rights agenda in education. Today's conference, our fourth, is the first to take place since the 2024 elections. Those who have questioned the progressive policies of prior administrations, including many of you here today, are now charged with the responsibility of governing, and to do so in a way that matches our principles, meets the moment, and creates a lasting positive impact on America's students and families. With this transition from opposition to governance, or at least for some of us, governance adjacent, we think the time is right to explore the theme federal executive power and education. So the question that is in our minds, now that the conservatives have federal executive power, is how and to what ends should this power be wielded? How do we seize this generational opportunity to achieve long-held ambitions in education whilst keeping our fidelity to the Constitution and the rule of law? What has the administration gotten right or not? We'll begin by hearing from Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, who has passionately advocated for returning full control over K-12 education to the states while maintaining a strong role for the federal government in civil rights enforcement. Our first panel today, an armchair discussion, our first plenary session panel after the armchair conversation with Secretary McMahon will be a panel that discusses whether there is a need for a new law school accreditation agency, and if so, the obstacles facing such a venture, including the role that the federal government might have in such an effort. At lunch, we'll hear from Paul Clement, former Solicitor General of the United States, one of the finest Supreme Court advocates in the nation, an attorney known for keeping his principles whatever the cost. We'll hear a spirited debate thereafter about immigration enforcement actions in education, and we'll conclude the day with a panel that will discuss what tensions, if any, may exist between eradicating campus anti-Semitism and ensuring campus free speech. So let's get things started. First up is the armchair conversation with Secretary McMahon, which will be conducted by Marissa Schultz, news editor of the Washington Examiner. I'm delighted to introduce them today. Secretary McMahon was appointed by President Donald J. Trump and serves as the 13th U.S. Secretary of Education. A businesswoman, education policy leader, and public servant, she has decades of experience in job creation and expanding educational opportunities. Born in North Carolina, Secretary McMahon earned a bachelor's degree in French from East Carolina University, initially aspiring to be a teacher. She later served on the Connecticut State Board of Education and the Board of Trustees at Sacred Heart University. She has had a multi-decade career in business as CEO of WWE, creating thousands of jobs and sparking her passion for career and technical education. Under the first Trump administration, she served as administrator of the Small Business Administration and later chaired the America First Policy Institute, where she focused on reforms to education and workforce policy. As secretary, she prioritized expanding school choice, empowering teachers, and returning education oversight to the states. She calls Connecticut home and has 2 children and 6 grandchildren. Marissa Schultz is the news editor at the Washington Examiner, managing the team of politics reporters and editors. She got her start in journalism at the Detroit News, covering local news and earning several awards for her investigative work, including Michigan's Young Journalist of the Year. She's a former education reporter who focused on Detroit public schools and Michigan's higher education institutions. She moved to Washington to become a White House and congressional correspondent, first for the Detroit News and then the New York Post. Marissa went on to cover national politics at Fox News before turning to editing. She's a graduate of Michigan State University. Madam Secretary, Ms. Schultz, would you please come to the stage? The room is yours.
How are you this one? Chrissy, you didn't go to the fire scene? Yeah. Okay, wait a minute. Good morning. How are you? Nice. Absolutely. So formal. Morning, everybody.
And very much in the spotlight. Well, first off, thank you all for joining us, and thank you especially, Madam Secretary, for being here. It's such an honor, and I appreciate the opportunity to ask you some questions today. I think for starters, just given the gravity of the news that happened this past week, I wanted to start off talking to you about Charlie Kirk. It's hard to believe that he was shot on a college campus in broad daylight, speaking his mind and exercising his right to free speech. There's been so many conversations in the week since about how do you move forward, and is this really a turning point in dialogue? And I think there's concern on college campuses right now as well of just security and safety, and whether you should have these high-profile speakers if there is a risk of violence. So I guess starting off, what would be your message to colleges as they're weighing upcoming events on whether to cancel them or not? And maybe perhaps your message to Turning Point students as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me here this morning. And Marissa, it's very nice to have you as the moderator or the interviewer or the questioner here this morning. What happened to Charlie was just an unbelievable tragedy and a travesty. I've known Charlie for a long time. I've participated in a couple of his Turning Point events, and he was just such a dynamic speaker and a great force. I think I was interviewed yesterday, and I was asked, if you had to describe Charlie in one word, what would it be? And I said, force. I said, he just was an incredible force. But if you take, if we are to take our lead, perhaps, from his wife, Erica, who the day after his assassination, I think it was, or within 2 days, was such a courageous voice to come out on stage and say, in a I think a private session that she had, and she said, look, Charlie's voice is not going to be at all dimmed. If anything, it's been enhanced by this awful, awful action. And I think that's the message that we would all take away, that we're not going to be daunted. We won't be cowed by the cowards who would do these kinds of things, that we will continue to be a force for good, and will continue to be a force for civility and debate, and to bring forth ideas, and I think that's exactly what we're going to continue to do. Now, I was at University of Indiana Friday night. I was at a football game. I wasn't speaking, and I wasn't part of the ceremony or anything, but I can tell you that that university has taken very strict measures relative to its security, but they were the same measures that were in place year before and the year before that when I went to these games. They do have very strict protocols, and I think most universities do. I'm so incredibly sorry that there was not a different security, you know, for Charlie, but who would ever have imagined that sitting outside in Utah on this beautiful day that there would be a deranged individual who would have it as his intent to assassinate Charlie Kirk. So I do think universities have to be careful. I do think precautions have to be taken. The president has asked for increased security, I think, for cabinet and for staff, and has actually encouraged Congress to increase their own security. I think we have to be prudent at that, but just like after 9/11, when President Bush came out and said we cannot stay at home, we cannot cower, we cannot huddle down, we just have to be vigilantly moving forward. And so that would be certainly my advice to colleges and universities. And for those who are participating, you know, don't take unnecessary risks, but don't cower. Let's keep our message going forward and be strong.
And I think that's a very good point. And how do you think the climate on college campuses, as you see it, perhaps contributed to his death?
Wow, I really don't know that if it's the climate on college campuses. I do think that in our discourse that we're having, when Charlie always talked about making sure that our ideas were exchanged, that debate was open, that it was, and he was often aggressive in his debate. Excuse me. But he was always very polite. He didn't ever, you know, insult anyone. He challenged them. He made them speak about what they were thinking and offered his ideas. And I think that's what we have to look for. You know, our debates have to be civil. But as we have seen on college campuses, you know, anti-Semitism riots and the things that are happening, I do think that we have created an atmosphere not just relative to Charlie, but on college campuses where students do not feel safe. It's one of the things that I've recently challenged universities on, is to make sure that they do have proper procedures in place for the protection of their students so that they feel safe. Anti-Semitism was a clear demonstration to us of some of the hatred that is on campus. And I was asked, after we challenged some of the universities, you know, are you really trying to shut down free speech? Absolutely not. First Amendment right has to be strong and as robust in our country as ever before. But there is a time, place, and manner for protest and civil protest on campuses. And that's what we've challenged colleges to do and universities to do. Make sure that you have broad diversity of views on campus, that each side can be represented, that no side can be shut down, because if you shut down the speech of one side to allow the freedom of speech for another, you have actually compromised the entire principle, and that we cannot have.
I wanted to ask you perhaps a delicate question, and it has to do with transgender issues, which have been part of some of the recent campus shootings. First in Nashville, Tennessee, where 6 people were killed at the Covenant Christian School. More recently in Minneapolis, where 2 children were killed at a Catholic school. The shooters in those cases were ID'd as transgender, and then most recently with this Charlie Kirk assassination, the suspect, according to authorities, was living with someone, his partner was transitioning. Do you see a connection between the transgender movement and school violence?
I really don't know. I think there's a lot more to be discovered, a lot more investigation to be found out relative to that. We don't know that transgender individuals that may be taking, different kinds of drugs during that process? Does that have any kind of an effect on them? I think it would be way too premature for me at this particular point to say, yes, there's a definite correlation. I think we need to know a lot more.
Just announced, I think today or maybe it was last night, that your department is looking into a patriotic education initiative, which perhaps dovetails with this conversation as well, where you would be steering grant money to schools that prioritize patriotic teachings and the role of religious faith in the founding of the United States. I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about that and how much grant money could be at stake.
Well, I don't know the exact amount of the grant money at this particular point because they'll be part of, different grants that might go out. But I think clearly we want to emphasize our civic education in our country. Recently I saw a statistic that 41% of students 18 to 29 years old, only 41%, say that they love America. And that means the balance doesn't love America. And why don't they love America? Why aren't they proud to be Americans? It's because they don't know America. They don't know the foundations. They don't know the real history of our country. And I think it is incumbent upon us to return civics to all of our schools from, elementary all the way through high school and higher ed. I think it's really important that we teach respect for our flag, that we teach respect for our country. I mean, when you have high school students that don't know, what the three departments of our government are, for heaven's sakes, they don't know even that you have to register to vote in different states. I mean, it is appalling, the lack of knowledge that many of our students have. And so one of my initiatives is to make sure that patriotic education, even though Department of Education does not control curriculum, we don't hire teachers, we don't buy books, we don't do any of that, but let's encourage, if we can, that our schools throughout the nation and those who are applying for grants would understand that they will have, some portion of understanding that this might be something that I would consider to be very beneficial for them in the grant awarding process. So you could get some bonus points or et cetera, or have some priority if you're looking at patriotic education.
The theme for this conference is federal executive power in education, and I couldn't think of a more fitting guest than yourself for this. When you were sworn in to become the 13th Secretary of Education in March, if you and President Trump have your way, you could potentially be the last Secretary of Education. You've been leading an effort to decommission the federal department and transfer money to the state level. When you took office, you shed about 50% of the education staff, and then Trump signed an executive order basically supporting closure of the department. That said, and what I've been really fascinated about is for a department that's supposed to be winding down, you have certainly been very, very busy. Under your leadership, you have initiated approximately 200 Title IX investigations into schools, primarily dealing with gender issues. And then there's been another 200 Title VI investigations related to DEI and anti-Semitism and other civil rights issues. These investigations have resulted in the withholding of federal funds and settlement agreements and various legal actions. So I think my big sort of overarching question as I'm thinking about this is, why is a department that is supposed to be essentially heading toward extinction so active?
Well, you don't just shut off the lights and walk out the door. If you were trying to return education to the states, and that's really, I have changed how we are talking about closing the department really to returning education to the states. And in order to do that, I think we have to continue to uphold the law. That doesn't mean we shut down. Our Office of Civil Rights is continuing to investigate Title VI, Title IX infractions, and we have certainly the authority to do that. And a lot of our Title IX work and Title VI work is then turned over to the Department of Justice. And as we are winding down, I mean, the fact that we eliminated almost half of those investigators and already have turned over a lot of our work to the Department of Justice. You know, there are other civil rights organizations, OCRs, Office of Civil Rights, in HHS, in DOJ, in almost every other agency that will continue to investigate these things. So returning education to the states is a process, and Congress actually has to approve it. And so really what we're trying to do is to show how we can move different parts of the Department of Education to show that they can be more efficiently operating in other agencies. For instance, I don't know if you'll get to this question, but I'll talk about it a little bit now. We have signed an MOU or an interagency agreement with the Department of Labor. And we've moved a lot of our workforce development already over into the Department of Labor. We have assigned some of our personnel to work there. We have oversight over it. Most of the budgeting comes from the Department of Education. But if we look at the management, you know, of our Pell Grants and the Perkins Act and those things that are really about workforce and labor, I find that it's much better to have them in the Department of Labor, where, you know, we can combine all of these workforce efforts. You know, over the entire United States government, there were 43 workforce programs in all of different agencies, including the Department of Education. Now, I can't think of a more inefficient system than to have duplication and just one side not knowing what the other is doing. So let's consolidate them all into the Department of Labor, where I think they should be. And if we show that this is an incredibly efficient and effective way to manage these programs, it is my hope that Congress will look at that and approve these moves. Now, we can't transfer this in whole cloth to the Department of Labor without the permission of Congress, but we can do this aspect of what we're doing and build and show how it is best served in this department, how the allocated funds will help it run better, and how one source managing all of labor, especially with the workforce Pell that was just passed through the big, beautiful bill, all of this combined, I think, is really going to help solve our workforce issue and operate more efficiently. So those are the kinds of moves that we'll be taking, moving different things to different agencies. We don't know what they will all be. There actually was a bill introduced that said that our IDA, or our special needs department, should go back to HHS where it first began. Well, I'm not sure about that. Yes, that seems to be, maybe that'd be a reasonable move, but we want to look at it. We want to make sure it can work. So as we're working with Congress and working with our other, you know, colleagues to get this done, let us really look at it. Let's be sure that we are not moving, you know, hastily, but that we are taking the right steps at the right pace for success in this movement.
You'd mentioned the Department of Justice, and the task force to combat anti-Semitism has been very active as well. You've opened up various investigations at elite institutions in response to campus protests, anti-Israel efforts. Harvard, in particular, has been a big focus. Can you tell us what you all have identified as the problems at Harvard?
Well, clearly Harvard is one of the most prestigious universities in the world. But we didn't just look at Harvard. We actually had our first complaint with Columbia. But I think it was much more evident in recent media coverage with Harvard when you saw students that were locked in a library and other students pounding outside on the glass of the library. And we saw the students at Columbia who were blocking the entrance ways to the library and to study halls for Jewish students. And I even talked to Jewish students who told me they really felt unsafe on campus. I met with the president of Columbia at the time, just before funds were withheld from Columbia. And then a new president was put in place, and she and I have met and talked twice. We eventually reached an agreement with Columbia. They will pay a fine back to the United States government. Their funding will be released again, and it's primarily research funding, and I believe our universities do some of the most incredible research in the country, and we want them to be able to do that. But they have to abide by the law. They have to abide by Title VI. They have to abide by Title IX. They have to be worthy to receive the funds that they are receiving from the United States government. So Harvard was one of in that first group that we looked at, Harvard had some of the same violations of anti-Semitism. Theirs were a little bit older, if you will. They weren't quite so much in the news, but they had encampments. They still are not hiring on merit. As a matter of fact, there was a lawsuit, students v. Harvard, that the courts ruled on, that Harvard was not hiring via merit, or that their admissions policies was based on merit, but they had race quotas for coming in, and so Harvard has to abide by those laws, and they were not. So we're still in the throes of negotiating with Harvard. They filed a lawsuit. They won the first round, and they actually, one of the things they were claiming was that we were, the steps that we were asking them would violate First Amendment rights. And that's just not true. I think that we have a really good case against Harvard. I think we'll appeal. But Harvard has already started to put in place some of the things we wanted them to do. They reassessed their Middle East policies. They actually fired a couple of their professors. They are looking at having safe measures on campus. And so without even admitting any guilt in any way, they have started to change their policies. And that's the ultimate goal of our investigation, of making sure that things are proper on campus. It's not to be punitive. That's really not the goal. The goal is to make them change their policies and practices, and if they are not in compliance with the law, then surely we're going to insist that they are, or they won't receive federal funding.
You'd mentioned the legal action, and a federal judge in Boston had intervened on that Harvard case and said you should start reversing the $2.3 billion in cuts to Harvard, and the judge said the Trump administration was using anti-Semitism as a smokescreen. But as you suggest, the case isn't going away anytime soon, and President Trump seems very keen on getting, according to him, no less than $500 million as part of any settlement with Harvard. And I think he mentioned that to you at a cabinet meeting personally, too. He said, don't negotiate, and they've been very bad. On that note,
Can I just add one thing? This is the same judge who had ruled, against Harvard in the Students v. Harvard case, which was overturned. And so it was the same judge, and we will appeal.
And just one final point on that. Do you think a settlement is possible, or at this point, do you think it's just going to come down to the courts to side in your favor?
I'm certainly hopeful of a settlement. I have spoken to Alan Garber, the president, at the very beginning of this. I haven't spoken to him since. But I do think that with the idea that Harvard has already started to take certain measures to change what they were doing, I certainly hope that there will be an agreement. It's not our goal, to have to go to court to make people abide by the law, or to make universities abide by the law. If they don't want any more federal funding, no problem. They can withdraw and run the university the way they want. But I think the federal funding for Harvard, not only for students who attend for their tuition, but also the amazing amount of research funding they get, over $2 billion, it's almost $3 billion, is very significant to those scientists and professors who were there, who have grants, and who are working on their own projects. They can take that grant money and go somewhere else if it's a grant directly to them. So I think it's in Harvard's interest to continue to negotiate. I think it's in all of our interests, for Harvard and for all of the other universities that we are sending letters to, that we are investigating, and there are others, and hopefully there will be these settlements with all of them, because basically we just want them to do right.
As for the settlements, you mentioned Columbia. You also were able to get a settlement with Brown University, University of Pennsylvania. There was a settlement that was regarding, I believe, Title IX. And then right now, a big one is UCLA. There's been reporting that the Trump administration is seeking a $1.2 billion fine at UCLA. Can you just talk a little bit more, aside from the settlements and the money, when your term is up as Secretary of Education, what is the big picture mission for elite universities and colleges in America? How would you like to see them sort of transform and be remade?
Well, and as I mentioned earlier, our goal is really not to be punitive necessarily, but to have universities, I think, return to what we all believe that universities really started out to being, and that was it is a place for truth seekers. It is a place for open debate, sharing of ideas, of learning. And I think that's what we need to have on our campuses without really directing ideology that is being taught. And as we're training our teachers for future generations in these colleges and universities, if they are teaching ideology instead of fact-based learning, that's just wrong. We ought to teach facts. We ought to teach critical thinking. We ought to be teaching all of those things at our universities, and at the same time, so I'm being repetitive, welcome open debate and sharing of ideas, and that all students should feel free on campus to walk about and to not be punished if they have different ideas than other students on campus. I think we've lost our way in that, and especially our elite universities, who really are the ones that are focused on the most. If they can be that bright and shining example for that, we would have accomplished an amazing amount in this short time that we have to focus on our university. So that would clearly be my goal. I know it is certainly the goal of the president.
The department has been very active on the DEI front as well. Just in June, the president of the University of Virginia, he stepped down over the college's DEI policies. There's been numerous other investigations. And a federal judge back in April blocked the Department of Education's Dear Colleague letter that was sent out to schools, essentially saying that they needed to end racial preferences in their scholarships and in their programming. And I believe the judge in that case also said you needed to end that DEI portal, which was asking for submissions of discrimination so you all can investigate. Based on that lower court decision that happened in Maryland, is your understanding right now that race-based scholarships at U.S. schools are currently okay? They can proceed with those?
Well, that's really ongoing, and so we're going to continue, to fight for that, fight against that, because I don't believe that race-based scholarships, and I think when we look back at the Harvard decision, the students v. Harvard, that clearly that decision said, that your admissions policy has to be based on merit and not on race, and that's what we're going to stick to.
And you mentioned this diversity in viewpoint versus diversity based on skin color or gender. How do you intend to sort of enforce that diversity of viewpoint with these settlement agreements? What does that look like to you?
Well, it actually is written into some of the settlement agreements. There is that DEI is not part of the university policy.
In terms of the viewpoint part of it, where colleges could maybe welcome people with more conservative viewpoints, either in their faculty or on campus, what does that look like to you?
Well, I can tell you, the Harvard Crimson even published a stat. I'm so sorry. Allergies this season are so terrible. I apologize. But the Harvard Crimson published a stat that said only 3% of its faculty were conservative. And I certainly don't think that's a diversity of viewpoint. And as we look at, how they are teaching their classes, what kind of conversations are they having? Are they teaching ideology? And if one class, is favoring one way, there certainly should be a balance so that students really do get balanced opinions. And as I said before, let's teach facts. Let's don't teach ideology.
Another area that you have been very active in is the Title IX investigations. about 200 Title IX investigations currently under your administration. These are often related to transgender issues and locker rooms and bathrooms and whatnot. I wanted to ask you about a case that's right here in our backyard with these 5 Northern Virginia school districts. And they were deemed to be high risk because they were found to be in violation of Title IX for allowing transgender students to use bathrooms and locker rooms of their choice. And federal funding has now gone into this sort of reimbursement status with tens of millions of dollars on the line. Senator Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, the 2 senators from Virginia, not surprisingly, are not happy about this. And they've written you a letter, and they've been asking for the money back, essentially. And they're saying that Title IX is being used as a pretext for political retribution. And they're saying that these punitive actions run counter to your stated goal of promoting parent choice and local control. And I think the crux of their argument is that these 5 Virginia school districts have locally elected school boards who are accountable to voters, and those people made choices about how they want to treat the bathroom situation. So is the Department of Education trying to micromanage local policies as these senators suggest?
Well, I wish the senators could have been in my office about 2 weeks ago when I had parents from some from these 5 districts in Northern Virginia. One was a father of a son who was in the locker room, and there was a girl who was transgendering to be a male. And this is kind of the opposite of what you hear most of the time. These boys were very uncomfortable with this girl in their locker room changing, and they reported it. Those 5 boys were expelled from school. Now then I had the opposite side of mothers who were telling me that the girls, several of them were on the track and field team, and there was a boy in the locker room who was, claimed that, he wanted to be a girl and he was transgendering, and he just sat and watched the girls undress. He was already set to go out on the field. The girls were incredibly uncomfortable in that situation. And then, if you took it a step farther, there were 2 incidences of the same man and how he got access to the locker room. The parents still don't know, but he claimed that he was part of the athletic program, and he was admitted into the girls' and women's locker room. And one young girl, 9 years old, came into the locker room to change, and this man was standing there naked. She was frightened to death, and she ran outside. Another one at another time, same thing, came in. She ran into the bathroom in the locker room and finally waited because she felt trapped and afraid. And then she ran out, and as it turned out, this man was actually a convicted sex offender, and he was just free and was in these locker rooms. These are the situations in these 5 schools that became so prominent and brought to us that we then made the decision that we made to sue. And I'm going to stick by that because Al can tell you, it is just simply common sense to me as a mother and a grandmother. I can't imagine, and the mother broke down in tears that was talking about this young 9-year-old girl who was literally very frightened. Understandably, I think, when she went into the locker room. There's just no room for that. I do believe that men are men and women are women, and I think the President's executive order was very clear about that, and so that is the rule, that we are upholding as part of the Department of Education.
And beyond what's happening in Virginia, when you look at that executive order and when you look at the policies and the interpretation of Title IX, is it your position that any school in the country beyond these Virginia schools that allow transgender students to use these bathrooms could be subject to losing federal funding?
Yes, and we've been very clear even, and I wrote Governor Newsom a letter because, ironically, in his podcast with Charlie Kirk, he said that he thought that it was unfair for boys to be in girls' locker rooms. He didn't think that was correct. So I wrote him a letter and just basically said, put your money where your mouth is. Talk is cheap, but you're not enforcing that law, in California. And I would stand beside that every time when he would go out and then talk about it politically, and now he's trying to walk that back. It's just, I think we just need to come to terms with what's comfortable for all of the children.
Beyond the executive actions, and there's been so many of them, there's actually been a lot on the education front when it comes to Congress. And in particular, the one big beautiful bill that was passed and signed into law this summer. There's been so many interesting things in that bill on the education front, and I feel like we could talk for days just on that, but I'll limit it just to a few questions. The thing that I was very interested in was the school choice provision. Under the law tucked into this, and I don't think it's really gotten a ton of attention, to be honest with you. It's this first of its kind federal tax credit scholarship that that's open to all sort of education settings beginning in 2027. And people will be able to claim dollar for dollar a federal tax credit for donations to education nonprofit groups. But there is a bit of a glitch in this legislation in that there's an opt-in provision. So governors will have to choose whether the students and parents in their states will have access to this scholarship. Are you concerned with this, that this could set up a system where red states opt into this federal tax credit scholarship program, but blue states do not?
Well, I'm not particularly concerned that that would be the case, but I think, wow, if I were living in a state and I was a parent and I had an opportunity then to have school choice for my student, and I knew that the only way that my student was going to be able to succeed or have a better opportunity to succeed would be to get this scholarship that would then be available from an approved 501c3 organization, and my governor wouldn't opt in for that plan, I might wonder, why would that be? Why would my child not be provided that opportunity? Now, it's a $5 billion cap, in the legislation, and governors do have to opt into it. But it is an opportunity for individuals to donate up to $1,700 and get a $4 tax credit for that $1,700. They put that money into an approved 501c3 organization, qualified organization, that then can take money and give scholarships to students and allow them to have school choice. I just think that's an incredibly great plan to give this school choice opportunity. I can tell you the president is so supportive of school choice. He doesn't believe that any child should be trapped in a failing school. Now, failing school can be, a school that's unsafe, a school that child cannot, advance through its, through the educational programs of that school. But when parents have choice to move their child to a different school, I'm a strong supporter, as you might imagine, of school choice, and so I think this is a wonderful program, and I would like to see governors across the country opt in to this program. But it'll be their choice. And if they don't opt in, then the voters in their state can decide whether or not they want them to continue in their position.
You've recently spoken about what you see as a broken higher education system and how traditional colleges have delivered delusionment for millions of students. In a speech, I believe, at Hillsdale, you talked about the administrative blow at colleges and the need for degree programs to deliver a clear return on investment. At the same time, you've been a champion of vocational work, as you mentioned. There's been a trend of late where two-year public colleges that focus on vocational and trade programs are seeing significant growth, and they're outpacing that of the traditional four-year institutions. The One Big Beautiful Bill does something significant to advance that, as you noted, creating this workforce Pell Grant program that will start in 2026. Can you explain your vision for this expanded trade program? And are they the answer to what you see as a broken four-year degree system?
I could probably spend the rest of the day talking just about this. I think it is such an important development, and I think it starts with, and myself included, thinking about what education really needs to be. I mean, do we need to think about a different paradigm relative to education? Do we still need four-year colleges to deliver, a workforce and jobs program, for our students? I mean, isn't the real goal by the time you've gone through school and you've graduated from college, or you've graduated from a community college or high school, that you could get a job that could support you and your family, and that you could grow and enrich yourself and create your own personal wealth, ever how that is designed. And I think that is really the goal. It's not the only goal for teaching. We'd like to expand minds. We want to look at, all of the great cultures, all of those things. But in the end, we have to have an ability to sustain ourselves. And so I think that I go all the way back to hearing the stories of post-World War II, and how everybody then that was so involved in in manufacturing and all the blue-collar trades, they really wanted their children to go to college. They wanted them to be better. They wanted them to have white-collar jobs. And that was the way that they were going to succeed. And I have nothing to say against any parent or any child that it wants to go to college, that can go to college, that can afford to go to college and get their degree. I think college is a wonderful place to, and in that speech I even said college is often a place where you really mature, you really, you can even meet an eventual spouse or sometimes have your first child. So there's all kinds of wonderful benefits. And if you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, many of those jobs, you have to have that more advanced education. But do you know that the fastest growing sector of millionaires in this country today are our skilled trades? And that's because we need them so much. We need our plumbers, our carpenters, our HVAC folks. We need all of that. And I think as we are, and all of our technology, it's just growing at such a rapid pace. So technical schools, vocational schools, trade schools, the CTE workforce has really got to be encouraged, because we have 7 million jobs available in this country that we don't have the skills available to take those jobs. So if we can look even at middle school, high school, working with our vocational schools, our technical schools, to have dual credits. A child can graduate from high school, and I have visited many of these schools now. I am on a 50-state tour around the country to see how, and I know I'm digressing, so just bear with me while I kind of give you this whole picture. But I visited micro schools, I have visited AI schools, public schools, private schools, and where we're seeing an incredible amount of change is this connection between our community college or our tech schools and our high schools. And it is a requirement in some states that as you get your diploma to graduate from high school, you are also getting a certificate from the community college or a tech school that shows you have an ability to go into a trade. And that is going to help solve our workforce problem. It will get people into the economy right away. It will be a necessary bridge for those who really don't need to go to college, because we're seeing college enrollments go down. We're seeing more of the higher ed enrollments through women, and they're getting more advanced degrees. Males are not enrolling in those as rapidly as females are. But really, we need to look at how are we skilling our workforce today, and to fill the needs of of industry in our country. And I think it is so vital that we do that.
As our time here is sadly coming to a bit of a close, I wanted to ask you a few rapid-fire questions, if you don't mind.
Uh-oh.
Given your past life in professional wrestling, I need to ask, what is more theatrical in your experience? A WWE WrestleMania ring or the political arena?
See, that's such an easy layup question. WWE, I could control the outcomes.
Very good. And then you also served in the first Trump administration. What are you finding is the biggest difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0?
Well, I really believe that the president, with the 4-year gap, we'll call it his gap years before he came back for the second term, had such a clear idea of the policy, you know, that he wanted to affect. He started a lot of it in his first administration. I mean, you know, the Tax Cut Act that he put through in the first administration, Workforce and Tax Cut Plan, was just, that's been renewed, and thank goodness, but he knew that was going to work. The economy was on such a good plan, you know, when COVID hit. But I think he really had a very, very clear idea and a better idea of how to work with Congress and how to push things through, a better idea of the organization of the White House. And therefore, all of the agencies then, I think, were organized much better. And I can tell you that this maybe is a little pat on the back, I don't really mean it to be, but during the transition process of selecting the cabinet members and ambassadors and all of the people that would be serving as political appointees, the amount of thought that was given to that, and this cabinet, and I'm proud to serve in it. The first cabinet was really good, because I was there too, but this cabinet, we all know each other. 7 of us came from the America First Policy Institute, that we all worked on a lot of the policy that then came into the second administration. We are collaborative. We work together to push policy through. I mean, on this project that I'm working on with labor, not only did the Department of Education sign an MOU with labor, but so did SBA, the Small Business Administration, and Administrator Loeffler. And Secretary DeRaymer and I, we are going to do some traveling together to talk to different universities. So I think the collaborative aspect and just a very, very clear vision of where the president wants to go has really been an incredible difference.
And then you and President Trump have been pushing to get the presidential fitness test back in schools. If there were a Trump administration challenge, what cabinet secretary do you think would score the best on the presidential fitness test?
Well, I'd have to take myself out of that, first of all, because, you know, I couldn't really say I could do it. But all of the push-ups and pull-ups and all of that, all I can tell you, we saw, you know, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, was very accomplished, and I think he stays incredibly fit, but it's a pretty fit cabinet. I'm not sure we could all pass that test, though. But we should work and strive to do it every day. Just to be healthy and fit is really it's the president's message, that we should have a healthy mind and a healthy body. I mean, the old Greek axiom, and I think that still works today. And he wants, you know, through MAHA, to make sure that we're eating healthy. That we're getting, you know, a lot of the preservatives and drugs and all of that out of our food, and the Secretary of Agriculture is working in combination with that. So this is a full-on measure to improve, I think, the life and quality here, you know, in America for education and for our general well-being, and so I applaud all of his efforts in doing that.
And when you leave, and then in January of 2029, when the next president would be sworn in, do you think the Department of Education will be fully closed by then?
Certainly it is the goal to have all of the Department of Education then move to the states, and for those other agencies that could take up part of what is being done by education today, I think through the method that I talked about before of moving parts of it through different agencies. You know, the Title I funding will continue to be appropriated and move through Congress, whichever agency that comes through, which it did before there was a Department of Education. The IDEA money for our students with special needs will continue to be appropriated and come through. The grant money is going to continue to come and be appropriated through Congress. So, you know, we were incredibly successful before 1980 when the Department of Education was established. And if we look, I'll just take this one side note. We established the Department of Education. It became fully effective in 1980. We have spent $3 trillion from then until now. And the scores of our students have continued to decline. Well, there have been little blips and little plateaus, but in general, the graph is like this. So we spent $3 million, we've established all of this bureaucracy, we've taken more power away from the states with worse outcomes. I'm about outcomes. I ran a company based on outcomes, and that's what we need to see in education. It'll be better served at the state level without the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'll wrap with the final question any good journalist asks, and that is there anything I missed, or is there anything that you would like to get out that I didn't touch on today?
I really think I just said it. I think that was my wrap-up statement, and I appreciate the time very, very much with everyone this morning, and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We really appreciate it.
Another big thank you to Education Secretary McMahon and Marissa Schultz for a very engaging conversation to start off our day. We will now have a short break just outside this room and reconvene at 10:15 for the first panel.